It is my pleasure to now introduce our next speaker, Professor Dr. Martin Krenn, Director of the Department of Archives and History of Science at the Natural History Museum in Vienna. Professor Dr. Martin Krenn studied history, philosophy, and archival science at the University of Vienna, at the Humboldt University in Berlin, and Sorbonne University in Paris. In the year 2020, he was appointed to his present position as head of the Archive for the History of Science at the Natural History Museum in Vienna, and he has published extensively in the fields of contemporary history, regional history, and history of science. Professor Krenn will now be sharing his research on the background and procedures that led to Haast being raised to the Austrian nobility, being knighted by the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph. And this is the story of how Julius Haast became Julius von Haast. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. Martin Krenn.
Dear Sascha Nolden, thanks for the introduction. Dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen in New Zealand, my presentation would like to take a closer look at the historical events that led to the Austrian ennoblement of Julius von Haast in 1875. So I'm dealing with a very detailed aspect of Julius von Haast's biography. One could say I'm dealing with the von in the name of Julius von Haast. The title of the lecture can therefore be succinctly paraphrased as follows: searching for the von. Just to give you I'm trying to switch my to give you an idea of what to expect in the next 25 minutes, I'd like to discuss three main aspects. I would like to begin my presentation with the question, how did one actually manage to get a title of nobility in Austria? And why can these processes be well understood today in terms of archival sources? The last point will cover a bit of Austrian archival history. After that, in a second part, I will come to the actual topic, the historical background of Haast's ennoblement. And in a third part, I will present the coat of arms of Haast in more detail, and then finally make some summary remarks at the end. First, to the general question of nobility in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. The Austrian nobility is a status group that was officially abolished in 1919 after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy in November 1918. The Austrian nobility, like the nobility of other European countries, arose from the feudal system of the Middle Ages and was characterized by great diversity in terms of ranking and linguistic, ethnic, and religious affiliation. Last but not least, this reflected the diversity of the dual monarchy. In this context, Austrian nobility law was also an extremely complex matter. A few years ago, Reinhard Binder-Kriegelstein, for instance, presented a standard work here, Austrian Nobility Law 1868 to 1918, published in Vienna 2000. I would now like to limit myself to a few central aspects that also play a role in the ennobling of Julius von Haast. In general, a distinction is made between high nobility, princes and counts, and lower nobility in the historical Austrian nobility. This lower nobility arose almost entirely from ennoblement of the 18th and 19th centuries. Besides, the last ennoblement in Austria was for a member of the last imperial government on the very last day of its activity, Emil Hohmann Ritter von Hermiberg, Minister of Public Works, was elevated to the rank of a baron on November 11th, 1918, shortly before the Austrian Republic was proclaimed on November 12th. In April 1919, the Austrian National Assembly formally decided to abolish the nobility. The following levels of nobility can now be differentiated. First, simple nobility, with or without noble of, Edler von. Second, knight, Ritter. Third, baron, baroness, Freiherr, Freiherrin. Fourth, count, countess, Graf, Gräfin. And on the last and highest level, prince, princess, Fürst, Fürstin. So Haast was on the second level, knighthood. This leads to the question, how did one become an aristocrat in Austria? In principle, a title of nobility could be acquired in two ways, either by transferring an existing title, for example, due to birth, or by conferring a new title of nobility. In theory, everyone in Austria, including women, by the way, could apply for ennobling. In addition, there was the possibility for certain groups of people to obtain nobility almost automatically and free of charge based on predefined criteria. These were either long-serving soldiers or the holders of certain Austrian orders and medals. In this context, one speaks of a so-called systematic nobility. Specifically, there were four orders that came into consideration for ennoblement. The Imperial Order of the Iron Crown, shown in the picture on the right, Kaiserlicher Orden der Eisernen Krone. The Imperial Order of Leopold, Kaiserlicher Leopoldorden. The Military Order of Maria Theresia, Militär Maria Theresien-Orden. And the Order of St. Stephen, Stephansorden. By far, the most common way of being raised to nobility was to acquire the Order of the Iron Crown, as was the case with Julius von Haast. The general principle was first the order, then nobility. The award of the order made it possible to apply for ennobling in one of the three lower ranks of nobility, for instance, applying for knightship. After such an application, the title of nobility was usually granted without any problems and without a detailed examination procedure. A special feature in Haast's case, however, was that he was a non-Austrian national. Therefore, a few difficulties had to be cleared out of the way. I'm going to discuss this a little bit later. At the end of the process, the aristocratic title was awarded along with a newly created aristocratic coat of arms. In the archive, this process found its way into the so-called nobility files, Adelsakten. Officially responsible was the Supreme Aristocratic Authority, Oberste Adelsbehörde, in the Austrian Court Chancellery and, in the 19th century, in the Ministry of the Interior. This Supreme Aristocratic Authority also managed the so-called Nobility Archive, Adelsarchiv. Separate file rows with various documents are found there, for example, on the dismissal of aristocrats, the extinction of noble families, noble family trees, noble orders, or noble foundations. All these materials are now kept in the Austrian state archives. Second chapter, the knightship for Julius von Haast, 1875. The ennoblement of Haast was preceded by systematic lobbying by his friend and colleague Ferdinand von Hochstetter. This is already clear in the more than 1,000-page biography of Julius von Haast from 1948, which was written by Heinrich von Haast, Julius' son. At this point, my explicit thanks go to Simon Nathan, I hope I pronounce it correctly, who drew my attention to the relevant pages and passages of this book. Finally, the letters from Hochstetter to Haast, edited in an exemplary manner and also translated into English by our chair Sascha Nolden as part of his dissertation approved in 2007, are of particular interest. In addition to the documents in the State Archive, these letters form the central basis for tracing Haast's way into the Austrian nobility. In the course of his life, Haast received several high awards from European countries, including Austria. As early as 1865, Haast was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Franz Joseph Order by the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph. This order was donated by Franz Joseph in 1849 as a distinction for merits in military and civil matters. Hochstetter praised this in a letter to Haast in May 1865. Allow me to quote, "Victory, congratulations, member of the order, congratulations. You are a knight of the order of Francis Joseph, and the medal is already on its way to the Austrian embassy in London for you and will be forwarded to you by the British embassy. Sincerest congratulations from me and my wife. The matter has now been successfully achieved, and I will allow myself to drink champagne to the health of the decorated one, as Petschler is just dining with me, and to your prince. Hip, hip, hurrah." Karl Petschler, besides, was a merchant from Auckland who supported the Novara expedition in Auckland. Hochstetter had already played a decisive role in the background for this award to Haast. The immediate reason was that in 1865, Haast named a New Zealand glacier after the Austrian emperor, the Franz Joseph Glacier, in Westland National Park on New Zealand's South Island. However, the Franz Joseph Order was not associated with any elevation into nobility, as Hochstetter clarified to Haast in November 1865. Quotation, "As far as the knighthood is concerned, you are knight of the order of Francis Joseph, but there is no nobility attached to this order, so you may not call yourself von, and one cannot apply for a knighthood on the basis of the order of Franz Joseph. Any step taken by me in this direction would be futile. The knighthood for you still lies in the future's wheel of fortune." From then on, Hochstetter and Haast constantly occupied themselves with the subject of Haast's ennoblement over the following years. Then, in 1873, it seemed the time had come. Heinrich von Haast describes the events of that year in flowery words as follows. At the time of the Vienna exhibition of 1873, Haast and Hochstetter had been in correspondence about the possibility of his being knighted by the Emperor Franz Joseph. Haast had sent many contributions to imperial institutions, but emperors, like other fountains of honor, need some motive power before the fountain plays. 3 or 4 mowers in the Imperial Museum would be worth more than a name on a glacier in the New Zealand bush. And so Hochstetter suggested that Haast should dedicate the mower skeletons and collection of New Zealand birds to the Imperial Museum at Vienna. Although Haast had submitted New Zealand objects for the World Exhibition held in Vienna in 1873, the basis for his ennoblement can be seen elsewhere. Crucially, Haast donated mower skeletons to the Austrian imperial collections in 1874. My dear colleague Matthias Hashauser will deal in detail with these donations of mower skeletons later on, and he will also deal how this donation was reflected in the collections of the Natural History Museum, Vienna. It is interesting that these skeletons were initially stored in the Viennese Hofburg and were only inventoried in 1876 when the Natural History Museum was officially founded. In any case, in 1874, Haast received the Order of the Iron Crown, 3rd class, for donating these mower skeletons. In the official letter of the Obersthofmeisteramt, Office of the Court, from March 1874, one can read, "Has His Majesty the Order of the Iron Crown Third Class most graciously deigned to bestow." And also, "Has His Majesty accepted the offered 3 Moa skeletons as a gift for the KK Imperial Natural History Museum." We are in an institutional transit phase here. Today's Natural History Museum Vienna had not yet been founded 1874. This did not formally happen until 1876. However, the course was already set in 1874, and Hochstetter actively tried to acquire highlight objects such as these New Zealand Moas. Generally, entry into the Austrian nobility was automatically associated with the award of the Order of the Iron Crown, as said before. One problem now, however, was that Haast was a foreigner, and the admission of a foreigner to the Austrian nobility was only possible in exceptional cases. Once again, it was Hochstetter who played the decisive role. In a letter to Haast from November 1874, he stated, "Last week I spent the whole morning driving from Pontius to Pilate and have to ask you for patience in this matter, which is not as simple as you imagine. It will happen, but be patient. Firstly, I had to have a copy of the imperial decree made, and secondly, an imperial petition is needed, as you are a foreigner, and it is a very rare exception for a foreigner to be elevated to the Austrian knighthood. So I will now have to go to various persons to make this possible." Finally, on December 16th, 1874, Hochstetter spoke personally to Emperor Franz Joseph. There is a written source for this visit in the form of a letter from Hochstetter to Haast. Franz Joseph responded to Hochstetter's suggestion that Haast be knighted on the basis of the Iron Crown order. In the words of Hochstetter, "His Majesty was very gracious and thought that it should be possible." On January 28th, 1875, Hochstetter again had an audience with Franz Joseph. And as part of this audience, facts were created, as Hochstetter was able to report to Haast. I just want to let you know very briefly that on 28th of January, I had another audience with His Majesty, and that the Emperor, in his kindly manner, personally informed me that he had fulfilled my wish, so that, despite the fact that you are a foreigner, an exception would be made and you would be raised to the status of a knight of the Austro-Hungarian Empire on the basis of your Order of the Iron Crown. This enabled the Austrian nobility authorities to issue the nobility decree to Haast and to draw up a coat of arms for Haast. In any case, it is crucial at this point that a direct link can be drawn between the ennoblement of Haast and his donation of the Moas to the imperial collections in Vienna. A few words concerning the coat of arms of Haast. Each new Austrian knight was assigned his own family coat of arms by the nobility authority. The documents for this process can be found in the so-called Nobility Archive, Adelsarchiv of the Austrian State Archives. Haast's coat of arms, chosen by the Coat of Arms Office of the Nobility Authority, deserves a brief description. The shield in the center, which is encased on the left and right by blue and red helmets, deserves special attention. We find here symbolic items that are typical for New Zealand, at least in the eyes of the nobility authority. A black, red-tongued, double-headed eagle on yellow ground rose on the shield head. This double-headed eagle is one of the oldest symbols of the Austrian monarchy. In the left blue field, you can see a wavy tide in the background and ascending volcanic mountain range. To the right of this, we see a wingless antediluvian bird, probably a kiwi, standing on sandy soil. A mine tunnel is marked on the bottom of the shield. Here a miner kneels and works with mallet and iron. In front of him, a pit light. Below spreads a blue band with the motto Vitam impendere vero in golden lapidary script. In English, life for the truth. A short addition at this point. It would still take some time for Hochstetter himself to make his way into Austrian nobility, as he complained to Haast in 1875. My Hamburg title of nobility is of course a mistake, because in Germany every von is turned into a baron. Hochstetter also strongly aspired to join the Austrian nobility. This seemed to be much more prestigious for him. In 1884, however, Hochstetter was also ennobled. In contrast to Haast's coat of arms, Hochstetter's coat of arms looks relatively simple and uses far fewer motifs. The helmets, however, are more richly decorated. By the way, Hochstetter's motto is Mente, Corde, Manu, mind, heart, hand. Short summary. In 1875, Haast, who by this time had long been in New Zealand, was knighted by Emperor Franz Joseph, less for his outstanding services to the exploration of New Zealand than for his donations of objects to Austria, in particular Moa skeletons. The key person in the background was Ferdinand von Hochstetter, who spoke personally to the emperor in this matter. And to take a brief look at a larger historical context. After 1870, a large number of commoners were raised to nobility in Austria. Admission to the nobility took place on the basis of previous orders being bestowed, mostly without major examination of the arguments. Due to statistics on ennoblement between 1848 and 1898, 65% of all barons and 94% of all knights were created on the basis of an order. This inflation of noble titles forced extensive reform in the early 1880s. Around 1884, for example, the somehow automatic ennoblement were abolished for the majority of Austrian orders. In August 1884, automatic ennoblement was removed from the statutes of the Order of Leopold and those of the Order of the Iron Crown. For Ferdinand von Hochstetter, it was just about possible, since he was knighted in January 1884 when he was awarded the Order of Leopold. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. This has been a most enlightening paper. Thank you for your most valuable research and the detailed treatment of this key point in Haast's biography. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.